would have completed everything that you need to know for your development issues. Please, I just want to remind you that I will not be going over or going through development issues again, because this is the second time that we are covering this. So for today, you are going to need your Explore textbook, and we will be covering pages 28, which will be your social indicators and your environmental indicators, and we will also be covering pages 32 to 33, which will be discussing HDI. So that will be today's lesson. Please, as we go through it, make sure you have your summarized notes with you, make sure you have your textbook with you, and then make sure as I go through these slides and you can visually see the information, make sure that you go and add in any extra notes that you may have missed out the first time around. And then hopefully I will see you very soon next week. So it's just less than a week and you'll be back in the classroom and teaching will carry on and learning will carry on as normal. All right, so let's have a look here. We're going to have a look at our social indicators. So that means we are looking, as soon as you see that word social, it means we're looking at people. And when we look at people and we're looking at development, we're always going to have a look at their quality of life. So we need to have a look at, are these people getting their basic needs? Are they living a good, healthy life? Or are these people's basic needs not being provided? And are these people poverty stricken? Are services not provided to them? Is medical care not up to scratch, as well as nutrition for babies or children? So we're going to go through this and have a look at the different indicators that help us determine whether a country is more developed or less developed, while we're looking at the social aspects. So the first indicator that we have a look at is life expectancy. Now, if you have a look in your textbook on page, on page 28, you'll see that all these indicators are there. It is very important that you know these indicators as a definition. All right, so make sure you know all of them that we go through today as definitions. Life expectancy is the average age that a person in a country is expected to live. Now, obviously, if your life expectancy of your country is 47 years old, that means what they are saying is that in general, the majority of the population are going to die by the time they reach 47 years old, which is very young. However, some countries have got a life expectancy of 85. The majority of people only pass away when they're 85 years old. This is obviously then going to be linked very closely to your healthcare systems, to nutrition and poverty. Because if people are not able to receive the health care that is needed, if people are not able to have the correct food, that means that the chances of them living longer is going to be a lot less. As well as countries that are struck with war or civil wars, those countries' life expectancies will also be much lower. All right. Okay, then B, it says the infant mortality rate. That is another factor that you would look at to see if a country is developed or not. Infant meaning any baby that's under 1 year old. If a child dies under 1 year old, their stats will then fall under the infant mortality rate, meaning that again your country's healthcare is not going to be very good, as well as those people are probably living in poverty. So infant mortality rate, if it is very high, it means that your country is going to be less developed. If we look at death rates, when we look at death rates, it's very important that in your definition, we're looking at the amount of people per 1,000 that die in a year. It's very important that you indicate per 1,000 and that die in a year. So if we have an extremely high death rate in a country, again, this is going to be very bad, and this is going to look more at an LEDC country. If you've got a very high death rate, it probably means either there's war or civil war, or the medical care is very bad, or people are living in extreme cases of poverty where they're dying of famine, malnutrition and starvation, which that is very, very sad. All right, Let's go to the next slide. The next indicator that we'll have a look at is the birth rate in a country. So that's how many babies are born per 1,000 people in a year. They may use the term per annum, but that means the same as in a year. Now remember, if you have too many babies that are born in a year in a country, that would mean that your population would probably be overpopulated. If a population is overpopulated and there's too many people, it's very difficult for the government and the natural environment to actually look after all of those people. So you do not want a country that's got a very high birth rate. Also, countries that seem to have very high birth rates seem to be countries where your education systems are not very good, and these people seem to be less educated on contraceptives or family planning. And as we discussed with death rates again is the amount of people that die per 1,000 per year. Again, you do not want to have a high death rate. That means that your medical and healthcare systems are not good at all. So therefore, if your country has got a high birth rate and a high death rate, that is not good development, and that would be a more of an LEDC country, a less economically developed country. If your country has got a very low birth rates and death rates, that would be an indicator of a more economically developed country, an MEDC. The next social indicator that we have a look at is literacy rate. Now, literacy rate is actually quite important because literacy rate is the only way that we can really measure education. It's very difficult to measure an education system when they're so different from country to country or different parts of the world. So therefore, what people will do is they will go and see or measure the literacy rate in the country. So that is looking at the percentage of people that are over the age of 15 years old that can read and write. And please remember, for a definition, you must be able to say all of that. The percentage of people over the age of 15 that can read and write. And not only read and not only write, it is very important that they can do both. Now, your literacy rate, like I said, will tell you the level of education in your country. All right. Then, your service delivery. If a country has got services that are provided to the people without any problems or hassles, we will say that that country is more of an MEDC country. So people will pay for that service like electricity, clean water and housing, and they will receive that service. Now, as we know in South Africa, for example, we pay for our electricity, but we still get load shedding. So therefore, that would be a very bad service indicator for our country. However, clean water, South Africa does provide very good clean water and is ranked the 3rd cleanest water in the world. But when it comes to housing, they need to look at how many people are living in solid houses. Is the government providing proper homes for all of the people? That then concludes our social indicators. And as I explained to you before, remember, I keep saying to you, it is so important that we need to link our economic indicators, our social indicators, and then the third one that I've been speaking about is our environmental indicators. So ways that we obviously are going to look after our environment. They all need to be linked together. For a country to be completely developed, they need to be developed in all 3 of those spheres, economically, socially, and environmentally. So we're going to have a look at ways that countries will look at the environment or protect the environment if they're in an MEDC country or an LEDC country. So most important thing that we need to have a look at when looking at environmental indicators is the impact the humans have on our natural environments. So yes, we must be able to use our natural environments, but at the same time we must not destroy it. And that's where that word sustainability comes from. Now, we should all be using our resources and our environment sustainably, meaning that we use the natural environment or our resources for the needs of all the people for today, but we are still protecting and looking after it so that the future generations can have what we have now. However, if this is mistreated and misused, we could also cause excessive amounts of pollution, and that comes from burning fossil fuels so that we can manufacture more goods so we can make more money. But while we are making more money, we're destroying our environment at the same time. And one day if that environment is not there or no longer there anymore, people are not going to live in that country or in that area. So therefore, environment is so important to look after. Alright, the other part of our environmental indicators is to have a look at the percentage of urbanization in your country. Now, urbanization is the amount of urban areas. So those are like your cities, your houses, your shopping centers, any area that is built up. So that is going to be an urban area. The more urbanized your area is, or the more urbanization that takes place, it means that more natural vegetation is being destroyed. So that is also a problem. However, the more urbanized your country is, the more developed they will be in terms of them making money, because now they've got space for all their factories and all their businesses. However, if they don't look after the environment at the same time, eventually there won't be an environment at all for them. So urbanization is a big factor, and it's one that is quite delicate, because as I said, you want to have a country that is quite urbanized, meaning you'll be more developed in terms of you can make more money. But at the same time, we need to protect our environment and look after our environment so that we know that natural resources are being looked after, as well as we need certain amounts of trees to breathe and whatever the case is. Then if you have a look at B, their carbon emissions, that is a big factor. Obviously, when we go and burn fossil fuels, we then send smoke or pollution up into the atmosphere, and then that is called carbon emissions. Also, any car that drives on the road, your exhaust pipe releases carbon monoxide, which will be a carbon emission, which obviously all of this put together just adds to the amount of carbon dioxide, so CO2, that's in our atmosphere. CO2 is pure pollution. And again, you have your countries that want to be more developed, they open more factories, and when they open these factories, obviously that means more pollution, but then they don't put anything in place to prevent the pollution. So a country may be more developed in terms of it's making more money, but it's polluting or destroying its environment, so that one day people won't be able to live there, or people won't be able to use the natural environment around them to live. So the environment needs to be looked after as well. Then the quality of our water is very important, as you can see in these pictures below. In a lot of countries, as you can see there's a person swimming through trash that is in that water. And people may not have correct means of disposing their rubbish or their trash in certain countries. There may be no laws in specific countries, or no one monitoring what gets thrown into a river. Now remember, a river is a very easy place to go and throw any kind of toxic waste or any kind of trash. Why? Because where you throw it, at the location you are, that river is going to obviously take that pollution or that trash down the river to some other point. So no one will ever know where it exactly came from. So your quality of water is very important as well, because your quality of water means if your water looks like this in this diagram here, we cannot drink that water. And that means that you have to send that water through purification plants. And the more purification that you need, because the water is more dirty, the more expensive your water becomes for the people in your countries. There are many countries in the world, lots of first world countries, that you cannot open a tap and drink the water straight out of the tap. You have to buy bottled water to drink. South Africa is one of the very lucky countries in the world. We've got the 3rd cleanest water in the world, and we are able to actually open a tap and drink the water straight out of the tap. Another big factor is air pollution, as I spoke about already with the carbon emissions. Have a look there in China. Before COVID, people were walking around with masks most of the time in the big cities only, where that was simply so that they did not inhale the pollution in the CO2. And if you look at the diagram underneath that, you'll see that you can't even really see the city or the buildings because the pollution is so thick. And that is an area or a place that now has focused on making money through lots of factories and manufacturing many goods, but has not looked after the environment at the same time. When we're also looking at our environmental indicators, soil erosion is a big factor. Your countries where people are not educated in farming methods, in correct farming methods, tend to have areas that become very eroded. And when we have soil erosion to the extent of these pictures over here, that land is then, you are unable to grow any crops on that land, and that land becomes barren or becomes a desert. And that's what you don't want. Now, most of your nutrients in your soil are in the first few layers of the soil, and when soil erosion occurs, the first few layers is what is washed away with wind or with water. So soil erosion all boils down to education, and that education is in correct farming methods. Then if we have a look at your countries with waste management, if you have a look at the picture on the left hand side, those are your LEDC countries, your less economically developed countries. They do not have laws or measures put in place of where waste should be dumped or how it should be dumped. It literally just gets dumped anywhere, any open piece of land, and they go and dump the waste, and people could be living right next to it. And there are layers and layers of it. Now that's very unhealthy for the people, as well as it completely destroys the environment. If we have a look on the right hand side, we've got an MEDC. That will be a specific dump that is situated only for waste or people's waste, and actually have machines that break down or disintegrate the waste materials, and therefore it's not going to affect the people nearby, and it's not going to affect the environment either. Then level of fish stocks. So if a country does not have any rules, or they might have the rules, but if they don't follow through with the rules or regulate the rules, then we tend to have people that overfish. Now fishing is very important because it's basically free food for people. A lot of countries that live along the coastline, the people rely on the fish as their main source of food every day. And unfortunately, we've got these big, massive boats that have come with technology, and they've got these beautiful fish finders. They go and they overfish. Now, they obviously, if fish are you're only allowed to catch them when they're a certain size. If a female fish is spawning, in other words, she's pregnant, you are not allowed to take that fish out of the water. Those are the rules. And obviously only a certain amount of fish is allowed to be taken by one ship or one vessel. Unfortunately, the law enforcement is not doing their job at the harbours, and they don't go and check that these people are following the rules. And if no one's checking, then people get greedy, and they're just going to take any fish that they can, even if these are fish that are maybe extinct. Now that becomes a very big problem, because it means that the people that are fishing from the land that need to feed their families every day are unable now to actually access any fish. Also, if the area has been polluted severely, no fish will survive in that area, and therefore these people are unable to feed their families again. And this becomes a very big problem, and that's an issue that our LEDC countries tend to have. Alright, so just so I have a little idea, I keep explaining to you that it is so important that we have to have our environmental, social, and our economic indicators all coincide and work together. Because, and this is a perfect example of a country that has got very good economic indicators. This country has got lots of money, and this country is Saudi Arabia, as you can see in the diagram or the slide. Saudi Arabia is a very rich country because they have got oil. Now that oil, obviously, there's very few countries in the world that have got oil from underground. They mine that oil, and then they send it to the rest of the world, and then the rest of the world refines it, and it becomes either petrol or diesel. Now, because there's so few countries with petrol or oil, it means that they can charge a lot of money for it. So these countries don't really need to have any other kind of business working there. The most expensive commodity in the world is oil at the moment. So therefore these people or these countries are making billions and trillions even every month just from the oil that they are mining and selling. Now, if you have a look at the diagram above the map, so the map just shows you exactly where Saudi Arabia is located. And there's a few countries, different countries there. But if you have a look at the map, it's called a case study of inequality. So we've got this country that if we only had a look at their economic status, so their GDP, how much money they make per year, we would say that this country is very rich, and they would have to, on the development scale, move all the way to the top. But as I said to you, we cannot only look at how much money a country makes, because the biggest problem in Saudi Arabia is that if we have a look at this diagram at the top here, we have a very small percentage of the population that is living in luxury, as the picture there, the very rich. And these are pretty much mostly your government officials. The rest of the country is living in extreme poverty, as you can see under the picture where it says poor, and as well as they live in an extremely underdeveloped area. So what they've done in parts of Saudi Arabia is that, unfortunately, the government has taken the money that they receive from the oil, and they've only spread that money maybe into one little main city and then amongst themselves as government officials. They do not look after the rest of the population. The rest of the population are living in poverty. People are dying of starvation. They don't have any services. They don't have any homes, although the country is very rich. So therefore we cannot say that this country is developed, because all the people are not living a healthy or sustainable lifestyle. It's only a small majority of government officials. So therefore, we can then say that this country is not fully developed. This is just another example. You've got part of your country that has got so much opulence, opulence meaning very wealthy, lots of money, where literally even in front of their homes or in important streets, the streets are paved with oil gold, or their cars are made out of silver or gold itself. That is how much money they have in these areas. It's almost ridiculous. But it's only a very small percentage. The rest of the population are forgotten about. And the rest of the population are living in extreme poverty, where they have makeshift homes, they do not have enough food, they're dying of hunger and famine, and they live in very unsanitary and dilapidated areas. So this is where the whole question comes around, where we can have a rich nation but poor people. Because if your government is corrupt and spends the money on incorrect measures, or doesn't use the money correctly, or only uses the money for themselves, and the people are not looked after, we can have a very rich country, and on economic indicators all the little boxes will be ticked and they will look very good on a graph under the amount of money that the country makes. But if we look at the country as a whole, we go and start looking at their social indicators, and we start looking at the environment, we will see that there's a lot missing. So therefore these types of countries, even though they have money, they will not be considered developed. And here's just another picture for you saying GDP is not enough. It hides inequality and wealth. So we cannot, again, as I said to you, we cannot only look at how much money a country makes or what is the GDP of the country. We need to go and look a little bit further to be able to say whether it is an LEDC country or an NEDC country. So therefore, there are other ways to measure development that have been brought about. And one of these ways, which is in your textbook, and that will be on page 32 and 33, we have a look at HDI. HDI is the Human Development Index. Please, it is very important that you know that the acronym HDI and what it stands for. All right. Now, when we're looking at our HDI, we're not looking at the environment at this point. But what happened was the UN decided to step in and said, they were sick and tired of looking at countries and looking how much money a country makes, and then realizing that that country actually isn't developed because of corrupt governments. So they decided that they were going to look at social and economic indicators. So they would give a country a score. So they would then look at certain factors, which we're going to have a look at now, and each factor would give a country a reading or a score, and then those countries would be placed in a table according to their score. And then we could see how developed a country was. So not only looking at how much money they looked, but looking at social factors. Now, there were very specific factors that we looked at. So there were 3 development indicators. The first one that the UN had look at was healthcare. Now, they went and had a look at all of the hospitals, all the doctors, all the clinics in the country, and they then scored the healthcare. Now, linked to the healthcare is they obviously had a look at the life expectancy of the people. Because again, remember what I said to you, if people are expected to live longer in your country, on average, that means you generally have a very good health care. So they linked those two together. They would then give a country a score after they looked at their life expectancy and their health care. The second indicator was the education of a country. Now remember I said to you, it's very difficult to go and rate an education system, but we can look at the literacy rate. So the percentage of people that can read and write over the age of 15 years old. We can look at what is the percentage in each country, and then we can tell whether the education system is good or bad. And then again, the UN would give that country a score. Then, lastly, we only go and have a look at the income. And the income is your GDP, how much money your country makes. But they said we've got to also have a look at the GDP per capita. Now remember when we did economic indicators, we said that GDP per capita was how much money the country makes divided by the total population. So is that enough money to be divided between all of the people so that all the people can get the services and the basic needs that they need? Then once the UN had gone and investigated these three indicators and given a score for all three, they came up with a final score. And the score was obviously on a scale. Your score would be between 0 to 1. So in other words, your score went 0 or 0,1, 0,2, 0,3 onwards until it got to a 1. A 1, or let's go 3 first. A 0 rather is a very low HDI. That means that majority of your people are probably living in poverty. They've got a very low standard of living, and they obviously, as we had a look, they're going to have a bad healthcare. They're going to have a very low literacy rate, so not a very good education, and the country does not make that much money. So that would be obviously standard of any LEDC country where they have a low standard of living. So 0 is very, very bad, and unfortunately there are some countries in the world that sit with an HDI score of 0. That means there's almost no development occurring. People are just surviving. A 1, however, is a high HDI score. It means that your country will be perfectly developed according to those three indicators. There is no country in the world that has a perfect 1. Why? Because development is always ongoing. Development is not something you can reach. It is something that has to be worked on every day. So therefore, we would say it is a country with a very high standard of living, and that would be an NEDC country.